A dramatic reshuffling of power dynamics and economic policy reverberated across North America as tensions escalated in response to a new strategy deployed at the highest levels of government. The move was characterized by an assertive response from a nation with deep economic and cultural ties to its neighbor, signaling an unyielding stance on trade and sovereignty. The event unfolded as an unexpected countermeasure to a set of tariffs that had been set in motion by a leader whose aggressive approach to economic negotiations had already made headlines. The decision to announce tariffs on long-standing trade partners was not merely a fiscal adjustment, but a declaration of intent that set off a chain reaction across the region. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. In a display of both pragmatism and defiance, officials from the neighboring country opted for a strategy that redefined the relationship between the two nations. This decision, made amidst a climate of uncertainty and charged political rhetoric, was engineered to challenge the imposition of new tariffs by asserting economic independence and promoting domestic resilience. The bold maneuver underscored an evolving sense of nationalism intertwined with a pragmatic vision of economic strategy. The policymakers involved were acutely aware that the tariffs, while designed to protect domestic industries and recalibrate trade imbalances, could also disrupt long-standing supply chains and affect bilateral relations in unforeseen ways. Economic policy on the international stage is often a delicate balancing act, where the scales of protectionism and global cooperation must be measured with precision. The tariffs introduced were envisioned as a tool to pressure other nations into revisiting trade agreements that had long been taken for granted. However, this approach risked igniting a tit-for-tat exchange that could eventually spiral into a broader conflict, impacting everything from consumer prices to geopolitical alliances. The countermove, crafted by officials determined to safeguard their national interests, was emblematic of a broader strategic recalibration that many believe could redefine the future of trade in the region. The decision to retaliate with a bold move was anchored in a deep-seated belief that sovereignty and economic self-determination must be defended at all costs. The rationale behind this decision was rooted in the conviction that national interests should not be subordinated to external pressures or transient political whims. Economic resilience in this context was not just about safeguarding industries, but also about maintaining the cultural and political fabric of a society that had long navigated the complexities of globalization. This policy shift was expected to send a clear signal to both domestic audiences and international counterparts that every nation holds the right to defend its economic integrity. At the heart of this economic showdown was the interplay between long-standing trade relationships and emerging political realities. For decades, the two nations had enjoyed a symbiotic relationship, with trade agreements fostering economic growth and social progress on both sides of the border. The introduction of tariffs, however, disrupted this equilibrium, prompting a reevaluation of long-established norms and practices. The subsequent countermove was thus not merely a defensive tactic, but a proactive assertion of economic independence. It highlighted the necessity of adapting to changing global circumstances while preserving the core principles that had historically underpinned the bilateral relationship. The newly implemented tariffs were perceived by many as a provocative measure designed to recalibrate the balance of trade. By targeting specific sectors, the decision-makers intended to protect industries deemed vulnerable to international competition. The tariffs were structured to impose additional costs on imported goods, thereby incentivizing consumers to favor domestically produced products. This approach was intended to stimulate local economies and foster a sense of national pride in indigenous manufacturing capabilities. However, the ramifications of such a strategy extended far beyond simple cost adjustments, threatening to upend established patterns of commerce and trade that had been built over many years. Economic experts observed that the tariffs could potentially trigger a chain reaction affecting multiple sectors of the economy. Industries reliant on imported raw materials and components would likely face higher production costs, which could then translate into increased prices for consumers. The long-term implications for the domestic market were complex, involving a careful weighing of the benefits of protecting local industries against the risks of stifling innovation and competitiveness. The countermove by the neighboring nation, therefore, was not simply a reactionary measure, but a calculated decision to preserve a broader economic equilibrium that might otherwise be disrupted by aggressive tariff policies. In the realm of international diplomacy, actions such as these carry a profound symbolic weight. The decision to impose tariffs and the subsequent response were both imbued with a sense of national identity and pride. Political leaders and economic strategists alike recognized that these moves were not just about dollars and cents, but about asserting control over a rapidly changing global order. The bold maneuver served as a reminder that economic policies are often inextricably linked to national identity, and that the assertion of sovereignty can have far-reaching consequences in an interconnected world. The interplay of economic interests and national pride was evident in every aspect of the decision-making process, from the initial announcement to the carefully orchestrated response. The implications of this episode extend into the realms of both domestic and international policy. Domestically, the move was expected to galvanize supporters of nationalist economic policies, reinforcing the idea that protecting domestic industries should remain a top priority. It resonated with a constituency that felt overlooked by globalization and eager to reclaim a sense of control over their economic destiny. This fervor was coupled with a recognition that the nation had the capacity to adapt to new challenges, transforming adversity into an opportunity for reinvention. The counter-move was thus a manifestation of a broader political narrative that emphasized self-reliance and resilience in the face of external pressures. Internationally, the decision was poised to send shockwaves through established trade networks and diplomatic channels. Trade agreements that had been in place for decades were suddenly subject to re-evaluation, as nations on both sides of the border scrambled to understand the full implications of the new policies. The bold move underscored the fragility of interdependent economies in an era where political decisions could rapidly alter the landscape of global trade. Nations that had previously operated under a shared framework of mutual benefit were now compelled to reconsider their positions, weighing the costs of continued cooperation against the desire to protect national interests. The strategic recalibration prompted by these actions was likely to inspire similar moves in other regions, as countries observed the unfolding developments with a mixture of apprehension and determination. A deeper analysis of the economic policies reveals a multifaceted strategy aimed at recalibrating not just trade balances, but also the overall structure of international commerce. The tariffs, introduced with the intent of leveling the playing field, were part of a broader strategy to address perceived inequities in global trade practices. This approach was built on the premise that existing trade arrangements had, over time, created an uneven playing field, where certain economies enjoyed disproportionate advantages. By imposing additional costs on imported goods, the policy aimed to incentivize domestic production and reduce reliance on foreign supply chains. The counter-move in response was designed to counterbalance these effects and maintain a degree of stability in a rapidly shifting economic landscape. Political leaders on both sides of the border were acutely aware that these measures would have significant ripple effects. The timing of the announcement and the subsequent response were seen as emblematic of a new era in trade relations, one where national interests could override long-standing economic partnerships. The decision to embrace a more confrontational stance was not taken lightly, as it carried with it the risk of escalating tensions and disrupting established channels of communication. Nevertheless, the imperative to safeguard national sovereignty and economic stability outweighed the potential risks. The bold move was thus a reflection of a broader political philosophy that placed a premium on decisiveness and strategic autonomy. One of the most compelling aspects of this episode was the interplay between economic theory and political pragmatism. The decision-makers involved were not solely driven by abstract economic models, they were also guided by a keen understanding of the political and cultural dimensions of trade. The countermove was a deliberate assertion that economic policies must be tailored to the unique circumstances of each nation, rather than conforming to a one-size-fits-all approach dictated by global institutions. This perspective was informed by a rich tapestry of historical experiences and a deep-seated belief in the importance of national self-determination. The move signaled that economic policies could be used as instruments of national empowerment, capable of reshaping the geopolitical landscape in subtle yet profound ways. The debate surrounding these decisions was intense, with economists and political analysts offering divergent interpretations of the potential outcomes. Some argued that the tariffs could serve as a catalyst for long overdue reforms in global trade, forcing nations to reconsider the terms of their economic relationships and pursue a more equitable distribution of resources. Others warned that the move might lead to a destabilizing spiral of protectionism, as countries retaliated with their own tariffs and barriers, ultimately harming consumers and stifling innovation. The counter-move by the neighboring nation, therefore, represented not only a strategic response but also a broader philosophical statement about the nature of modern economics. It was a bold assertion that in an era of rapid change, nations must be willing to take risks and challenge established norms if they are to secure their long-term prosperity. Central to this unfolding drama was the recognition that economic policy is never an isolated decision. Every tariff, every countermeasure, is embedded within a complex network of historical relationships, cultural identities, and political aspirations. The imposition of tariffs was thus not merely a financial maneuver, but a deeply symbolic act, one that encapsulated decades of economic interdependence and geopolitical maneuvering. The countermove was a reclamation of agency, a declaration that a nation could assert its interests even in the face of overwhelming external pressures. It underscored the idea that the global economy is not a monolithic entity, but a dynamic and contested arena where power is continuously negotiated and redefined. The significance of these actions extends beyond the immediate economic sphere, touching on broader questions of national identity and sovereignty. The decision to engage in such a bold maneuver was rooted in a vision of a future where nations would be judged not by their willingness to conform to external dictates, but by their capacity to innovate and adapt in the face of adversity. This approach was seen as a repudiation of what many perceived as an overly bureaucratic and constraining global economic system, one that prioritized the interests of multinational corporations and international institutions over those of individual nations. The countermove was thus a manifestation of a deep-seated desire to reclaim control over national destinies and redefine the terms of economic engagement on a more equitable basis. Economic resilience, as demonstrated in this instance, involves more than just protective tariffs and strategic countermeasures. It is a comprehensive vision that encompasses a nation's entire economic ecosystem, from the smallest local enterprises to the largest multinational corporations. The move was designed to stimulate domestic innovation, encouraging industries to invest in research and development, and to forge new paths in technology and manufacturing. By shifting the focus inward and fostering an environment of self-reliance, policymakers hope to create a more robust and diversified economy that could better withstand the shocks of global market fluctuations. This long-term perspective was critical in ensuring that the immediate tactical decisions would pave the way for a more sustainable and resilient economic future. The ripple effects of this strategy were anticipated to extend well beyond the realm of trade, influencing the broader contours of domestic economic policy. The move served as a catalyst for renewed debates about the role of government in regulating markets and protecting national interests. Critics of free trade argued that the bold approach was a necessary corrective to decades of policies that had prioritized global integration at the expense of domestic stability. Proponents, on the other hand, maintained that open markets were essential for fostering innovation and driving economic growth. The countermove, therefore, was not only a response to immediate challenges, but also a symbolic gesture that sought to redefine the balance between national sovereignty and global cooperation. This intricate balancing act between protectionism and open trade has long been a source of contention among policymakers and economists alike. The decision to impose tariffs and the corresponding countermove underscored the inherent tensions between the desire for economic security and the need for global integration. Both approaches have their merits and drawbacks, and the unfolding scenario provided a real-time case study of how these competing priorities might be reconciled in practice. The bold move was emblematic of a broader trend in which nations are increasingly willing to prioritize domestic interests, even if it means challenging long-standing international norms and agreements. Political considerations were inextricably intertwined with the economic calculations that underpinned the decisions on both sides of the border. The leaders who spearheaded these moves were acutely aware of the political capital that could be gained or lost in the wake of such transformative policies. The tariffs were positioned as a means of reasserting national strength, while the countermove was crafted to reinforce a narrative of independence and resilience. These actions were not merely technical adjustments to trade policy, but deeply political statements that resonated with voters and stakeholders across the spectrum. They embodied a vision of governance in which economic policy was leveraged as a tool for achieving broader political objectives, from bolstering national identity to securing greater autonomy on the global stage. As discussions about these measures continued to unfold, it became evident that the implications of this bold move were both far-reaching and multifaceted. Analysts noted that the strategy would likely prompt a re-examination of existing trade agreements and necessitate the development of new frameworks for international commerce. The traditional paradigms of global trade were being challenged by a renewed emphasis on national priorities and strategic independence. This shift in focus was seen as a natural evolution in an era marked by rapid technological advancements and shifting geopolitical alliances. The countermove, in its essence, was a declaration that nations must be prepared to adapt to a new economic reality, one where the forces of globalization and nationalism are locked in an ongoing struggle for dominance. Underlying these complex dynamics was a recognition of the need for flexibility and adaptability in economic policy making. The decision to act boldly rather than retreat into a more cautious stance reflected a belief that the future of global trade would be defined by the ability to innovate and respond to rapidly changing conditions. The imposition of tariffs and the subsequent countermove were therefore not isolated events, but part of a broader narrative of transformation that many believed would shape the international economic order for years to come. This perspective was grounded in the conviction that in a world where the only constant is change, nations must be prepared to seize opportunities even in the midst of uncertainty. The interplay of historical context and modern economic imperatives was evident in every facet of the unfolding events. Past experiences, marked by cycles of protectionism and liberalization, informed the decisions made by contemporary leaders. The historical memory of economic crises and periods of rapid globalization served as a backdrop against which current policies were formulated. This legacy of experience provided both cautionary lessons and inspiring examples of resilience, contributing to a sense of urgency in crafting policies that would secure long-term national interests. The countermove was thus steeped in a rich historical context, reflecting both the challenges and the aspirations of a nation determined to chart its own course. In the intricate web of international relations, the bold move resonated as a powerful reminder of the importance of strategic foresight. It was a declaration that the economic landscape was not a static environment but a dynamic arena where national interests were continually renegotiated. The imposition of tariffs was not simply an isolated economic tool, but a means of leveraging broader geopolitical objectives. The countermove, in turn, served as a counterbalance to these ambitions, reinforcing the notion that economic policy was a matter of national sovereignty and strategic independence. The interplay between these forces provided a rich tapestry of policy debates and theoretical insights that were as much about philosophy as they were about economics. The resonance of these decisions extended into the public sphere, where debates about national identity, economic justice, and the role of government in shaping markets took center stage. The bold move became a touchstone for discussions about the future of trade, with commentators and citizens alike weighing in on the merits and risks of such a strategy. The broader societal implications were profound, touching on issues of employment, innovation, and the distribution of wealth. The narrative that emerged was one of empowerment and defiance, a call to reimagine the relationship between the nation and the global economy. This recalibration of priorities was seen by many as a necessary step towards a more balanced and equitable economic future. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on Mexico's bold move against the US after Trump's tariffs? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.